been amazing.
Yeah.
Blowing my mind. This is my first one. Sad it's my first one. Yeah, definitely. I'm jealous those who've been here a few years already. All right, should we get started? I think we're running a little behind. I'm going to try and move quickly. Thanks for being here. Anybody here that saw Earth from Space yesterday? Good, pretty much a lot of new people. Good. Yesterday we went through images that we get from satellites that are supposedly photographs, and we kind of broke those down in a forensic sort of analysis fashion, and came to the conclusion that they're all CGI, and with a few surprises in there. When Chris and Liz asked for me to come and share at the conference here, didn't know what I was going to do, so decided to take some more tidbits from some of my Faking Space series. So about half of the video series that I've created over the last couple of years is focused on the moon landings. So what we covered yesterday was some of the highlights from the first season and a half or so, all of season 1 and part of season 2. This is kind of what I've been covering in the last half of season 2 and now into season 3, which I'm about halfway through right now. You can find all of it at fakingspace.net. But I am Paul McLean, who I go by online, and the title of this presentation is NASA Moon Earth. So it's pretty obvious what we're going to be talking about today. I'm going to start with a couple of images just to kind of highlight what we're going to be talking about. From the New York Times in 1969. This was one of the biggest headlines that maybe many people ever thought that we would see. The celebrations were pretty huge. Yeah. Well, this looks pretty real to me, and I would even venture to guess that most of the people in the control room thought it was real. I mean, these were organic reactions, in my opinion. They're just looking at it on the computer screen. They're watching what the same thing the networks presented to the world. The media had to point their cameras at that one screen, and that's what went out to the world. So it was very, very, very controlled. I think that speaks for itself. And then we had the Apollo 11 press conference. I think their reactions spoke the loudest. First time I saw that, which was just a few years ago, where I actually sat and watched the whole thing. It's remarkable, their demeanor, and how they were having to look at each other for reassurance and make sure they were all on the same page. It was remarkable to me that more people hadn't caught on to this. Although I get some comfort around the fact that when I talk to a lot of people, especially the younger they are, they say that, yeah, they doubt that the moon landings were, as they were presented. So that gives me hope. I find it's the older generations that are holding on to it a lot more. Just what I found. All right, so I've broken down this presentation into 6 or 7 different sections, and we'll go through this real quickly. This really came about because in 2015, NASA released about 10,000 photos on the photo sharing website called Flickr. And these were high-resolution images that the astronauts allegedly took on the moon. These are the ones that, each of the astronauts that were walking on the moon, each had a camera strapped to their chest, a Hasselblad camera, and they were snapping pictures. And there was 10,000 of them from 6 missions. And a lot of the credit to this presentation goes from a partner of mine called Scott Henderson. He's up in Canada. But most of what you're seeing here today is really because of the research that he has spent 10,000 hours by his guess on what he spent examining these images. We've gone through a lot of these together. And then what I've done is help create content that can be viewed online and so people can start seeing, because I think he's uncovered some pretty remarkable stuff. So the first one we're going to go through just briefly, we're going to touch on each of these events, is that it appears that there was quite an accident when it comes to the Apollo 15 mission. And I'm going to show you some of the damage from that. The second section is called Recycled Rovers. got some evidence that there was one rover used for all three missions. So the rover is a little dune buggy, okay, and it was introduced into the Apollo mission program in Apollo 15. So 15, 16, and 17. So they're used for three missions. We were led to believe that each of the missions had its own rover that went with the lunar module, landed, and then they unfolded it and drove it around for and that sort of thing. It appears that there was only one rover, and we'll go through that. The third one is called simulations and cue cards. The simulation piece of this is really probably the baseline theme of this, because in my opinion, based on what we are finding when we really dive into these photos, because they're so high resolution now, we're able to zoom in, magnify these things, and really see some detail that wasn't available before. And what we're finding is that what the world was shown was shot here on Earth during their simulations. I mean, before you go on stage for the big performance, the last thing you do is you do a dress rehearsal. And you do it just like you were going to do it on stage. And that's what these astronauts appear to have been doing, is they went through a dress rehearsal, and they were doing everything like they were going to do when they were on the moon. And they took pictures and video and all that sort of thing. So when we get to the simulation part, I think that'll make a lot of sense. There's some evidence here. Everybody I've shared this with, their job is kind of support, so maybe you'll have the same reaction. Maybe you won't, but I think it's pretty much the smoking gun, at least was for me. Then there's the evidence of moisture and that the equipment is aging over time. Goes along with the recycled rovers, and that is the equipment. They didn't even bother to build a new set, so to speak, every mission. It was the same lunar module, the same equipment that was used mission after mission. And as it ages and breaks down and has problems, that's what we start to find in these photos. As the missions go along, this equipment is wearing down. And then there's the spacesuit. Pretty self-explanatory. Just released a video on this about 2 months ago, and I think we uncovered something that people haven't thought about before, so I'll leave it up to you guys. And then if we have time, I've got a couple other images that I would throw in the honorable mention bucket. They don't really fall into these other ones, but are very, very curious to me. So again, this is the Flickr site from 2015. About 10,000 photos were dropped in here, and you can magnify these things and really see some detail that we could never see before. And that's really what got a lot of people started on examining these photos for the first time and seeing the levels of detail that we couldn't. And we started seeing things that we hadn't before. Personally, I started questioning the moon landings probably in the 1990s. I saw a documentary, and I don't remember if it was online. It was obviously the internet was pretty primitive then, but it might have been something else online or on TV. But it was a documentary that was talking about no blast crater under the lunar module, and no dust on the landing pads, and shadows and pointing in different directions and things like that. And I said, yeah, I mean, I understood that might be something that they would have to take if they couldn't go, but they still, wanted to do it for various reasons. I didn't connect it to anything about the shape of the world at that point, but it's always been in the back of my mind. And it wasn't until the last few years when I started looking at these photos with the great detail that it was confirmed in my mind. All right, let's get into the Apollo 15 accident, and I will send this presentation to anybody. You just have to shoot me an email, because we're going to go through the photos probably somewhat quickly. And last time I gave this presentation, which was at the Question Everything conference in LA, and it's earlier this year in February, people wanted to spend time looking at the detail of the photos and really seeing what I was talking about. So happy to send this to you, and you guys can look at it, in your own time. No, it'll be on my website, but I can send you the presentation, and that's the best way, because once you get it on your screen, the original photo, and you're able, you have a big screen and you're able to magnify it, you're going to see a lot better than you would have seen on a YouTube video or anything like that. You need to see the detail of these. Okay? So this is the first we're going to go through. This is from the Apollo 15 accident. What it appears, I think I've got a thought I had a laser pointer on this thing. Oh, here it is. See that? No, good. So right here, where these two white arrows are, you can look at the exhaust bell housing, and it's been crushed. Right here, the line there. And this right here, these ropes hanging down, and these two pieces of equipment on the ground here, where these other arrows are laying. That's where the rover was attached. Okay, so this is Apollo 15. This is the first time the rover has been used even in the simulation. And what we think is happening is when they're simulating this thing, they're lowering this thing down, because we see video of the moon coming up. But what it appears, and if you go back, and I didn't have a chance to do this, which something I should probably do, if you go back and look at the Apollo 15 landing, which is a very long video, when they're getting really close, it seems like the lunar module drops like the last few feet. It seems like they're going real slow, and then it goes bam. You can kind of hear the astronauts even kind of, react like, or something like that. This is the only of the 6 missions where we do not see the 2 astronauts, photos of them climbing out, planting the flag, and doing the salute, which was always what they did. The first thing that the astronauts did on every mission, they would climb out, plant the flag, do the salute. Very patriotic thing. Okay? This is the only one of the 6 that didn't happen. They actually did a bunch of EVAs, 2 SEVAs, I believe, and then they came back and they did that ceremony. Well, we think it's because there was an accident, and when the lunar module dropped the last few feet, the rover actually broke off of its mounts, and that's why we have the ropes there, and we have the bars sitting on the ground, and we see that the exhaust bell housing here was crushed. The other thing is, this is the jettison bag here. This is where all of their urine and feces and waste was, and if you look closely there, the bag appears to have mold or mildew on it. Okay, now these things are all supposed to be in a clean room when they launch. Okay, I mean they prepare these things in a clean room. Everybody has a white lab coat on, and covers on their head and gloves, and these things have to be perfectly clean before launch. But again, you'll start seeing through here some of the equipment starts aging over time, and we'll look at that one again a little closer. This is from the outside then of the Apollo 15 lunar module, and we see that the secondary struts here, which is where this is pointing here, these are the swivel ball joints appear to have been replaced because the old ones are laying on the ground here. That's what these are. When you zoom in, you'll see this here. But they had to replace these because they were damaged when the lunar module dropped in. You'd think that there would have been some talk about having to replace things or parts laying on the ground or there being a concern. There was nothing in the transcripts about this. Again, we'll have to go through these kind of quickly for the sake of time. I've got a ton. This one is interesting. You've got two damaged personal life support systems on the ground here. Okay, so this is the original photo here. There's one right here and there's one back here. And then if you blow it up, it's here and here. Personal life support systems are their backpacks. Okay? Well, the key thing to understand here is that there were only one backpack for each astronaut on this mission. No redundancies. Okay? Well, in the background here is one of the astronauts. You blow it up, you can see him right here. Obviously, the astronaut taking the picture had to have one on. Well, there's 2 others in the photo of that. We've got told before. We've got a lack of continuity here. Okay, these are continuity errors. That's what you're going to find through this. According to the equipment list, there was only 2 personal life support systems. Okay, these were apparently damaged again. The other thing that Scott pointed out when he looked at this photo was the main strut here is not centered on the landing pad. And it appears to have been moved, and the ball joint has been broken off and just left between the 2 simulations. So when you compare them to the other landing struts, you can see that this appears to have been the side that took the biggest of the brunt of the impact when it fell. And you also notice a bunch of other pieces on the ground when you kind of examine some of these photos. So speaking of continuity errors, all of the images or the video that we saw before each of the launches to the moon, you saw the 2 astronauts walking from that van, right? Do you guys remember seeing some of this? Walking from the van to the Saturn V rocket. And they were wearing their spacesuits, and they were carrying their personal life support systems with them. We're also told, though, that, as I mentioned, there was only one spacesuit per and personal life support system per astronaut. They also show us that the two spacesuits and personal life support systems were packaged on the lunar module, and they weren't going to be putting them on until they were in space. So they were wearing them. They must have taken them off, packed them while they were on the rocket, and then unpacked them when they needed them. Just little things like that you pick up on when you start looking at what we were told, and then what do the photographs and video tell us. NASA seems to suffer from continuity errors. And the last one from the Apollo 15 accident that we'll show is Apollo 15 is where they did the hammer and the feather drop. Does everybody remember that? They were going to prove, after all these years, how it would react in, zero atmosphere, whatever. So that's what the main reason was for the photo, we were told. I forgot to put there it is. There's the feather. I'm not sure what the hammer is right there. The main reason I think that that they wanted to show this photo where it is because of the broken strap there. And my theory is that was part of the accident from the Apollo 15 simulation, and a bunch of broken pieces up in the top left corner. When you start to look at these, you may start to get a feeling that the astronauts were kind of doing some whistleblowing. At this point, they're obviously knowing that they're not going. And there's some other photos that we'll go through that kind of maybe point to this fact that they weren't being too careful. So they just took the pictures like they were supposed to. But the broken strap there is really, really interesting. It's like a lifting strap. All right, let's get into the recycled rovers now. The main evidence for one rover for all three missions is that the rear left wheel started in Apollo 15 had an oil leak, which is on the bottom left here. And it was spraying around the inside of the wheel as they used it. Probably from the accident. That's what we're concluding. It was dropped, it fell off, it broke off from its mounts. Apollo 16 then, these are the original photos above. Apollo 16, you can see it's gotten a lot worse. And then Apollo 17, it's spread up and they're throwing it up even over the wheel. The rover, the one and only rover that we think, continued to have problems and was breaking down even. They had problems with steering. And as we'll get to the next slide, you'll see that they probably had to make a lot of changes to it because it kept breaking down. In all, if you look at all the photos, Apollo 16 has two different rovers where just basically in the same mission, it looked different. So they were replacing parts. And there wasn't any redundancy for broken parts. They didn't have this big toolkit there and all these extra parts. If something went out on the rover, they didn't have spare parts there for it. But we could see that they were changing these things. Apollo 17 appears to have three different rovers because they were, again, it was causing more and more problems as the missions went along. And it's the frame rails and the tire tracks are the main evidence. This is from Apollo 17. Three different fender types. Again, you're going to want to get a hold of this and you can really zoom in on these. The rear fenders identify them, and all three of them, this is all from the same mission, Apollo 17, but they all have three different types of fenders on. Again, nothing in the transcripts about needing to replace anything, and even then, they didn't have anything to replace. This is from Apollo 17, three different tire tracks. If you look really closely, you can see that the indentations that are in the quote unquote moon soil are all different. This is from Apollo 16. called the jump salute. The astronaut is actually off the ground there. He was jumping. I've got the video on the next slide. But, sorry, this is one of the two rovers in Apollo 16, and it appears to have been the only one used for this photo opportunity. Again, it's called the jump salute. It is distinctive in the fact that when you zoom in on this front left fender, which is right here, it has this double rib. Every other picture from all three missions, there's only a single rib. This is the only photo from all three missions with a different looking fender. Take away with it what you will there. Here's the video of the jump salute. These are all cameras that were mounted on the rover where we get these multiple angles. And then we get this shot where he's jumping. So it's just interesting that they would have this one rover for all three missions with only one with a different fender. Okay, simulations and cue cards. This one I think is pretty interesting. And I think this is the most damaging evidence to illustrate that. What happens, we think, is the dress rehearsal, the simulations, especially with what the training calendar was shown to the media and to the world, what their astronauts were doing leading up to the launch. They're going to be doing a bunch of simulations in a week to 10 days before. And they went through this dress rehearsal and they took pictures and took the video, and then maybe that's the time after that they were told that they weren't going because NASA used those video and pictures to show the world. So these are color plates from the video reels and at the beginning of the magazines from all of the Apollo video and images. Color plate, I don't know if you guys know what those are, but where you can make sure that you have the right colors adjusted on your monitor, for post-production or what have you. Well, the interesting thing about all of these is that they were all, said the mission on there, Apollo 11, and they had a date on there that these were shot. July 11th, 1969. Does anybody know what the actual launch date was of Apollo 11? We launched July 16th. So 5 days later is when they actually launched. But the photos and videos are all dated July 11th. They land on the moon the 20th of July. The Sea of Tranquility was the destination, and they returned to Earth on the 24th. It appears all the photos and videos that the world were shown were actually captured on the 11th of July. It's the same for all 6 missions. Here's the training calendar from Apollo 11. I want to call out here that the inspector for a lot of these missions is this H. Jones person. And it's going to come up later when we look at the cuff checklist that the astronauts carry around, which is very interesting. Here is Apollo 12, November 11th, 1969. But their launch date was actually the 14th of November, 1969. Then on the moon the 19th, ocean of storms, and return to Earth on the 24th. Training calendar on the 11th of July was lunar module simulation and command module simulation. The launch date was 3 days later, according to the training calendar. And again, Jones is showing up as the inspector. This is Apollo 14. January 25th, 1971, when the photos and videos were captured. They launched on the 31st of January. 6 days later. Landed on the moon the 5th of February. Frau Mora was the destination. Returned on the 9th of February. The training calendar for the 25th was full. I'm not sure what some of that means. EVA was extravehicular activity. And then you have the command module and the lunar module simulation. and they launched again on the 31st of January. So the training calendar says. It says launch right there. This is, must be Apollo 15 then? Yeah. 17th of July, 1971. Actual launch date was the 26th. It's interesting that this is the biggest gap between the photo video date and the launch date. And again, I think my theory on the accident that happened had a lot to do with that. They had spent a lot more time cleaning things up and fixing things before the launch. I don't know. Good question. I'll have to go back and look at the original. Well, this is what the launch date was. So again, the 26th of July was the actual launch date. On the 17th, when the videos and the images were captured, it was the command module and the lunar module simulations, and they were flying some T-38s, it looks like. That was the launch day. This is the hardest one to read from a team. I don't think that's a 16. Even then, they land on the moon on the 20th, so obviously these would have to be captured after the 20th of April to be real. And they returned on the 27th. What were they doing on the 16th? Full day of simulations and photos and flight suits and a whole bunch of other stuff. The launch date again was almost a week and 9 days later. And then Apollo 17, 28th of November, actually launched on the 7th of December. Went on the moon until the 11th of December, and but again, these were captured on the 11th, November the 28th, 1972. What were they doing on the 28th? They were again not on the moon, and there's the launch. I brought up Jones again. So the astronauts all wore cuff checklists, and so if you look at some of the photos, what they were wearing on their wrists were little notepads that they would flip through. So what the astronauts are supposed to do when they're on the moon, which is, I always found it kind of interesting, because they appeared to have complete radio contact in real time with mission control, but they needed to have these checklists. I think this is what they were using during simulations when they had their helmets on, and it might have been hard to hear the director or who was filming barking orders. And so they went about and followed this and shot what they were supposed to shoot, exactly what these cuff checklists said. And you look at these impossible details that NASA would have to know months in advance. Locating where the 4 craters are to drive through. One astronaut operating 2 cameras, taking photos at the same time. And then, this is the interesting part to me. There's Jones showing up on the checklist when they're on the moon. I think the director was supposed to make sure that he didn't shoot. What's he doing there? Here's a shot from the other cuff checklists. When you go and see some of these, you start reading some of the details. It's pretty interesting. This is from Apollo 16. NASA months in advance knows the size, shape, and exact location of a rock. They know the time that the astronauts would arrive at it. And it says the camera settings, the position of the sun, where the footprints and where the disturbed area would be, question in quotes. And they know the mineral contents of the rocks when they open them up. They're pretty good. The theory that we have is that the checklists are basically like storyboards. When they were shooting these simulations, this is what they follow. When they're wearing these suits, maybe they couldn't hear the instructions from the film crew. The helmets would restrict their vision perhaps a little bit. They were used in Apollo 12 through 17. The only mission that did not have the cuff checklist was Apollo 11. You must have learned after shooting 11 that they needed to do this. This is from Apollo 14. You guys see the double shadows? This one's pretty obvious. You zoom in here. I have the next slide. You can see how exaggerated these double shadows are. This is only happening if you have multiple light sources. If you just have the sun, which we're told they didn't take any additional lighting, they just had the sun. This is from Apollo 11. The photo on the left here is the famous flag. So this is after the astronauts had set the flag and they've climbed back into the lunar module and they are about ready to take off. And you can see the flag is kind of almost pointing towards them, or towards the person taking the shot. But from the video, from the same time, which is taken from a camera that's sitting and videoing, that's attached to the lunar module, from the same time, has the flag pointing in a different direction. You can see it's pointing away. You can see by the shadow, it's pointing away from the astronauts. So this is just evidence that this is, the stage scene, that they've done multiple takes, and this is something that they put together later, and you've got continuity errors. This is kind of like, when you're watching a movie and somebody's got a full glass of water, and then when they cut back to the scene, it's already half gone, nobody's taking a drink, and you're like, you don't say anything, or whatever. But we see this stuff when we start looking at these photos and videos, we start seeing these continuity errors. This is from take 2. From Apollo 11. All right, let's go to the Apollo 16 explosion. You guys seen these shots when it takes off from the moon? Apollo 16 was really interesting. They all had sparkles. But this one is really interesting because if you look closely, it shows it a couple of times. Watch the panels there. There was a big explosion that occurred when these guys took off. There's no mention of this in the transcripts, like, oh my gosh, Houston, we just had a major, something or other. And I slowed it down. These panels are almost like whipping the wind too later, which is no atmosphere on the moon, by the way, or at least that's what we're told. And then I'll zoom it in here as best I could. Watch these front panels. Luckily, everybody was okay. NASA didn't hide the fact, though. These are from the command module later when the lunar module was going to rendezvous with the command module. Doesn't look seaworthy much anymore to me. So it was a pretty big explosion. So my first thought was, what was behind those panels? What would this potentially really damage the spaceship? They're out there in this environment that's 1 × 10⁻⁻⁻, I think it's -11 torr is what we're told that the surface of the moon is, the lack of air pressure. It's essentially a 99.9%, or the lack of air, down to a 99.9% vacuum. So the amount of pressure on this machine was, or this capsule, or whatever you want to call it, module, was intense. And this kind of explosion, you think, would cripple it. Here's a picture from before the launch, what the lunar module looked like when they were building it. If you zoom in here, this is what that panel is. Just a bunch of, totally essential electrical equipment and things of that nature. So I'm sure that an explosion like that wouldn't damage anything. Then another kind of piece of evidence when you are playing through the theory in your mind that they're using the same equipment mission after mission. You look at a picture of Apollo 16 before the explosion. This was taken on the moon. And then you look at the pictures of Apollo 17. It's like they got those panels in place. They're a little different color. You can see that they basically just replaced those ones that were kind of damaged in that explosion. I think it's the same machine. They just replaced those pieces and they shot 17 a couple months later. Okay, the moisture and aging equipment. How are we doing on time? All right, let's go fast. Let's skip that one. This is from Apollo 12. Condition of this piece of equipment is unmistakable. We got mold and mildew. These were all put in the clean room. But just before launch, these things are obviously supposed to be perfect. These things are full of mud and mildew and mold. It appears this equipment is just being left outside and, again, was recycled mission after mission and used as basically props. And they aged. The equipment started breaking down. This is from Apollo 12 and Apollo 14. This is equipment that's been left outside. Such bad shape that it had to be replaced. These are called the experimental packages, these foil-looking things. On the left, if you look really closely here, and you look at these photos, this is looks like mud. It just basically, when something gets muddy and then it dries in the sun and it leaves just behind a caked film, that's what this is right here, is what it looks like. This side here, you can see if you zoom in, it looks like the equipment here is just peeling up on all sides when you really examine these. These things are just left out in the sun and are breaking down all the time, curling up. Apollo 12, this is called the Surveyor. This thing was some very sophisticated equipment. My favorite part on this one photo is this. It looks like they ripped off the desk at school. You can see the glue that was left here. And they just attached it here, but it still had the, it's like this hastily put together prop that they put together. And when you zoom in over here, you can see evidence, I think, of standing water. As it's aged over time. This is from Apollo 12. NASA claims this photo was taken during an undocking procedure. It looks like water is drying from the panel here, and then if you zoom in right here, disappearance of moisture. We're told that there can't be any moisture on the moon, we're told. There's no atmosphere, any moisture, whether it's oil or water or anything like that, would immediately, the vacuum of space would eliminate it. This window appears to have been blown out during a pressure test. It was taped back, and a rain guard right here. Why would you need a rain guard in space? Anyway, it was broken, and then it was installed to try and keep the water out. And NASA claims that this photo here was taken halfway to the moon. Look at the water between the two panes of glass here. Just running down the sides. In zero gravity. It's supposed to be minus 250 degrees outside. This is from Apollo 14. This is I forgot what this piece of equipment is, but they're basically supposed to be shoving moon rocks and other samples and stuff in there. And you can see down here that this is all caked with mud, and if you look closely, there's evidence of rust. And then from Apollo 15 and 17, 15 is the damaged exhaust bell housing. The closest photo we have from Apollo 17 from the same angle is this one, and it seems that they didn't even fix the exhaust bell housing. You still see, if you really examine it closely, I think you can still see damage in the same spot from Apollo 17 and 15. And then this is the ultimate. When Scott found this and sent it to me, I was surprised that nobody had shown this before. This is the famous Apollo 17 flag. It appears to be wet, and it has been drying from the edges in. There's a close-up of it, showing the moisture. It just seems to be drying from the edges in. All right, let's get the spacesuit and we'll wrap up.
First, many have gathered for 50 years now how those white, fluffy, bulky-looking spacesuits we are also familiar with could withstand such a low-pressure environment, not become immediately rigid and render the astronauts completely immobile. But we must be careful when touting that whole idea as proof that the spacesuit would work, as advertised, because NASA claims to have figured that out long before astronauts allegedly stepped foot on the moon. You see, See, according to NASA, the astronauts actually donned two spacesuits. A pressurized inner suit, seen here, which was beneath the unpressurized outer white one. So don't be quick to claim the outer white suit would balloon up as the air pressure was reduced, because as the story goes, that part of the spacesuit wasn't even pressurized. We are told this inner pressurized spacesuit, which would still, even to this day, have to be considered a modern marvel of technology, was airtight, mostly made of neoprene, and was contained within a layer of embedded mesh-like material to keep it from expanding. Kind of like a balloon inside a bag of netting, only allowing the balloon to expand so far. Further, we're told the fingers, shoulders, knees, and elbows of this inner pressurized suit had accordion-like joints that allowed flexing without balloon. Truly, a technological masterpiece. The outer layer, the white, unpressurized suit, was made of fireproof, abrasion-resistant material, which was designed to provide thermal insulation and protection against micrometeors, but only works in a vacuum. So, case closed, right? Not so fast. When you start to closely examine photographs and employ some basic common sense, as usual, NASA's story just doesn't add up. And here's why. If the white outer suit wasn't pressurized and was designed only to serve as a thermal outer layer, then why do the gloves and helmet attach directly to this unpressurized suit? This is Neil Armstrong's suit, as displayed by NASA as his complete kit. The suit, flown in Apollo 11 for the claimed moon landings, has been on display for many years, has been restored and cleaned in an attempt to keep it from decay, and has a permanent record of the claimed event. The International Latex Corporation was contracted to make the suits. NASA's updated files claim that it has 21 layers of protection. Interesting that none are listed in the protection against radiation, but I digress. Here's another attempt to show the updated movements of the astronauts in their suits. The image on the left is from the Apollo 11 press kit. On the right is an image of the alleged pressurized suit. However, it's not pressurized in this photo. It's certainly not in the vacuum chamber. It's clear to see that the suit in the previous frame is not incorporated into this suit. This is a costume for simulation only. It does not have the seals required to pressurize. On the top left, the ring is not sealed to the suit, and the zipper does not go all the way up. The zipper would not seal and hold any air pressure. The seals and connections of the helmet and gloves do not compress and have the door latch tongue design for a quick attachment. The suit is done up using zippers, poppers, or snaps, and Velcro. This would not seal. The zipper does not go all the way up, not even hold a small amount of pressure. Again, these suits were designed to put on and off easily for simulation purposes, media events only. There is not a pressure suit inside. Even if the inner pressurized suit NASA claims the astronauts wore under the outer unpressurized suits, even if it was incorporated into or between the white abrasion layers, it still wouldn't seal because of the snaps and zipper connections. The connection rings on the glove of the suit are clearly not connected. The band on the suit is visible and the ring is just below it. The gap between the rings are about 3 inches apart. The ring on the glove is behind the watch. And the rings themselves are a quick connect and cannot seal in the vacuum space or even underwater. The suit is a staged costume used for practice and simulations. The images here are from Buzz descending the ladder from the Apollo simulation photos numbered here. It is very clear the gloves are not attached and, of course, cannot be in a vacuum. It is clear to see here that the connections are attached to this garment and not to the claimed pressurized suit, as there isn't one underneath or incorporated in. The connections shown here are not sealed properly to withstand the vacuum space. On the left is a foot port attached to the bubble helmet. As you can see, the seal cannot be compressed as what would be required, and the inside air pressure would push the cover out and away from the seal. It cannot be used in a vacuum, so the only reason it must be there is to give the astronauts a drink using a straw during practice. the above left are 4 photos of high vacuum seals, metal, and one-time use materials. These are needed to seal in a ultra-high vacuum areas, of which the moon we are told was an ultra-high vacuum area at 1 × 10⁻11 core. On the right are the helmet seals of the Apollo missions. The latch fits in the groove for easy installation. This connection does not have the capability to compress the seal and will not function even in a low vacuum. The gloves have a similar type with easy connection. The surfaces must be clean and free of foreign materials for the seal to be effective. The Apollo astronauts using the same suits covered in dirt for 3 EVAs, it would be impossible for the suits to work and reseal each time. The same is true for the hatch for the length, as they had to crawl through, drag dust and dirt with them. The door seals would not function in a pressurized suit. Even if the connections to the helmet and gloves were able to withstand an ultra-high vacuum environment, the outer white suit would have to be pressurized, which is in direct conflict with NASA's claims. Someone is lying.
They work in the pool as long as you're on the floaty. So yeah, this is kind of now what I think we need to focus on is that they were supposed to be wearing 2 spacesuits. There's one underneath that was pressurized, and that's what protected them from the environment. And then this white fluffy suit that, I think a lot of people that have investigated this just assume that the white fluffy suit would immediately expand, right, and be rigid, and they wouldn't be able to move in it. Well, NASA's been saying all along, that's an unpressurized suit. The problem is we don't get to see this pressurized suit that they actually did. Not even included. Just in artist renditions now. All right, so I'm going to wrap up because there's a quick look at some of the other ones. NASA now, have you guys seen this? NASA's now starting a campaign against flat earthers. I'm telling you, this is backfiring on them. They keep giving us attention. They're giving us too much attention. So I've started seeing this on social media the last few days. So they're calling out more attention to people that are kind of figured this thing out. So I thought I could show that. All right. ThankYouSpace.net is where you can find all of these videos in their entirety. There's over 30 of them, covering a lot of what I did yesterday and today. And if you'd like to listen to my podcast, domelifepodcast.com. And I've also have a weekly radio show on Truth Frequency Radio with my co-host Roxanne, the Globalist Denier from London. And, sorry, what? And again, if you'd like to get a copy of this presentation or get any more information, please feel free to reach out to me. There's my email address, and I thank you very much. Up next, Nathan Thompson.